My name is Mark Zoller. I'm the Accessibility Coordinator for the City of St. Paul. I work out of the HREEO department. Thank you. And this is the July edition of the Equity and Inclusion Speaker Series. July is Disability Pride Month. And Saturday we celebrate the 34th anniversary of the signing of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, landmark civil rights legislation that continues to shape a more inclusive and equitable society. While Disability Pride is a celebration, it's also about reflection and action, reflecting on where we've been, how far we've come, and how far we have yet to go. As City of St. Paul employees and members of our boards and commissions, we all play a role in recognizing and dismantling ingrained ableism in the work we do and the services that we all provide. Ableism is usually not intentional and is not always visible, but it does have the very real effect of keeping people from accessing the spaces, services, programs, and information that the city works so hard to provide. Combating ableism means asking hard questions about our policies, practices, and assumptions, and committing to meaningful change. Our first speaker today has a long and impressive history with the city. Among her many other accolades, she's the first person who recognized the need for his designated accessibility coordinator in the city, my role today. And she saw an opportunity not just to meet the low standards of the ADA, but to rise above them and look beyond them as a city. Please welcome the director of our Talent and Equity Resources Department, Toni Newborn.
Much for the introduction. Toni Newborn, pronouns she, her, hers. I serve as the Director of Talent and Equity Resources. And I want to say a few things. So glad to see this area filled with folks. Thank you for coming to this. I've been with the city. It just marked my 10-year anniversary, July 13th, and I can't believe it. Can y'all hear me? A little louder? Okay. A little louder. I feel like I'm screaming. But I know that I'm not, so I'll be a little bit closer to the microphone. Ooh, okay, now I see the difference. So it just marked my 10-year anniversary with the city, started on July 13th in 2015, and have been here and survived ever since. A little bit of background about me, before coming to this city, I worked for the other city, the city of Minneapolis. I know. Worked for the city of Minneapolis, and I was in the complaint investigations division for the civil rights department. And so we investigated complaints of discrimination there. So I've been in the civil rights, human rights, social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, now human resources space for a long time, I guess. Combined both years, we're talking about 17 years in local government and in these spaces. I do want to add that part of my tenure, a lot of people laugh about me because I've had different jobs at the city in these last 10 years. I started out in HR, and then Mayor Carter was elected, and then was served as a chief equity officer, and then a brief stint in HREEO for about a year. I was looking at my some updates. I made some changes on my LinkedIn page around that time, and I was like, oh, it was exactly a year. And in that year's time, there was a lot of transition happening in HREEO. And one of the first things that was on my desk to handle, so to speak, was the creation of the accessibility coordinator position. So I do want to say, while I was involved, folks came and talked to me about hey, we're going to create this new position. The decision was made prior to me coming in as the interim director to have that position, but I had the fun part of actually filling it. And so that was one of the first things that was on my desk. And we started the interview process, our boring hiring process that everybody loves. We did that, and I got a chance to sit on the interview panel because I was passionate about making sure that with all of our positions, that we are bringing in folks with diverse background, and I mean diversity from its broadest sense, and folks who have lived experience, and in particular for this position. Having someone with lived experience in this role and opening our eyes, both internal to the city as well as external to the city, on what disability is from its broadest sense, because sometimes we have, you all know, invisible disabilities, and then there's times where we have folks who are visibly, their ability is visible. And so I wanted to be intentional around who we brought in, and we hired lots of different folks, or we interviewed lots of different folks for the position, and we ended up going with TJ. I don't remember TJ's last name. Middlebrook. He's my Facebook friend. I see him. He's had a lot of great jobs. TJ was amazing at the job, and TJ was limited in hearing, and he was deaf. And so a lot of folks, not a lot of people, but some people that were on the team were like, Toni, what are we going to do? I'm like, what do you mean, what are we going to do? We're going to ask him what he needs. Like, we're the Human Rights Department. We're going to ask him what he needs, and we're going to do it. So it wasn't something that was like difficult to process for me, at least, but I understood at the time that it was going to be a change. And once he was hired and of course offered and accepted the position, we sat down as a leadership team to figure out, after talking with him, figuring out, okay, what does TJ need to be an employee? Because TJ had worked in various offices, and I think he came from the state. So there's a way. We just needed to spend the time to figure it out. And we did. It costs money to do it. And sometimes when you have people in based off of their various needs, and that's for all of us, we may have to pay for it. And TJ educated us on, I said, okay, TJ, there were so many things that I didn't even think about, right? I didn't think about how TJ was going to be in a queue. So someone who is deaf, hard of hearing, how do you come up to them and have a conversation? It's things that we just like do for folks who don't have a disability related to hearing. I didn't even think about, so I had to ask him. And so he educated us on how to do that. So instead of coming from behind him, to talk, right? He said to come in front of the queue. I was like, oh, that makes sense, because TJ could read lips. So although we couldn't have if you're talking fast or there are multiple people talking in the room, that we needed to bring in an interpreter. But just a one-on-one conversation, TJ was fine, but it was the equivalent of sneaking up on someone from behind. And if I'm into my work, even if I'm in my desk, if someone comes up from behind me, it's scary. I'm scared. It takes me a while, my heart rate goes up. So imagine every time someone does that, their heart rate is going up and they're scared. So TJ talked to us about, okay, here's how to approach me at the desk. Also, how do we do meetings? Big meetings like this in person, because this is pre-COVID, so 2019. And then how do we meet with folks, multiple people, even smaller meetings? Sometimes, depending on the meeting, TJ would be okay on reading lips, but other times, like a large meeting like this, what he advised us to do was to sit in a square, not circle, sit in a square for our meetings. And then that way, as we're talking, and to kind of slow down our pace too, because he's reading lips, that he could understand what was going on. We needed to have a printed agenda, everything. And of course, you're supposed to do that for all meetings. But sometimes all of us just go to a meeting and okay, what are we talking about? We couldn't do that in the same way as we would, do before. And so it changed how we met. It changed how we engaged with each other. TJ's presence changed us from a standpoint of how he interacted with folks outside of the Human Rights Department. And so for me, it was fascinating. And I don't mean that from a negative standpoint of I'm now, evolved because we have TJ in the room, but it taught me a lot. It taught me about everyone's abilities to be able to, and modes of communication. All of us communicate in a different way or need some level of communication given to us in a different way. And it made me think about, from an equity standpoint, how to reach people where they're at. And if you think about it, I know equity is not a buzz term in a negative way with the state of our world and this country. But if you think about equity, even before this current administration, The Disability Act, the Americans with Disability Act, and disability work just in general is equity work. Anytime you walk into a grocery store and you have an automatic door, that is a result of the work of advocates coming in and saying, hey, I can't open the door. There are people in this country who can't open the door. Anytime you walk down a walkway or a corner and those little bubbled flooring, I don't even know what it's called, so for the folks in public works, correct me if I'm wrong, correct me, please, help me, please. But anytime you see that, that's to keep people from rolling out into the street. It also helps me because I have a 10-month-old and I have a toddler who still kind of gets into the stroller. So it helps me as well as the person who is in a wheelchair, a person who may be blind. It helps all of us. So if we focus on equity, we focus on making sure that all of us can have the services and meet our needs, but it also helps the people who are in need. And so, but we don't connect that. We connect equity or diversity and all these things. It's like some sort of board ceremony or somebody's getting a handout. But we have people in the room who can't survive unless we change our environment and we change our world or we adjust. And I want them to survive. I want them to be a part of our workforce and a part of our meetings. And specifically with TJ, I wanted him to feel comfortable and being able to be a member of the team and not standing out, but he stood out. He stood out, but also he could be a part of our team as well, that you can have both things all at the same time. And so I wanted that for him. And so we adjusted, and it was goofy. Some people did goofy things. Some people went up to him like, hello, they're screaming. I'm like, he can't hear you. He still can't hear you, even if you're screaming. That's not how it works, right? Your screaming is not gonna make him start hearing. But because of our lack of experience with folks who have different abilities, we think in our mind that, oh, we're gonna do this and this is what's gonna help them. No, you need to ask him first. So that's like one of the first step, ask him, and then use some level of common sense. And so for me, having him there for the time that I was there, because he outlasted me, because it was a short stint. Having him there challenged me, and I believe, I don't know if there are any folks in the room who were with me when I was there. I think it challenged all of us to think about how we come into our space and how we include people into our spaces and be intentional around it. And so, yes, sometimes I talked about the visibility and invisibility and disabilities, and sometimes you see someone that's like, oh, I can see that they need help, but sometimes we don't know that they'll need help. And unless they tell you, or how about this, we be intentional around, like, we understand that there are people in this world that may need additional support or may need a different type of support than what we're used to. So we create our spaces, we create our environments with that intention, both for the folks who we visibly see and folks where it's not as visible. And so I know I got a lot of slack. I saw the bill that I had to approve the bills and the payments that it took for TJ to be able to do his work and for us to be able to communicate with TJ. And I got a little bit of slack, like, Toni, I'm like, well, we're doing it. And so we got to figure out how to pay for it, because it's not an option that we don't, right? Don't opt out of including people into your spaces. The option is to bring them in as best as we can and being intentional around that. And we also talked about, I wanted to be careful with, like, putting DJ on this pedestal or saying, like, this person with disability, let's put stars and highlight around them. I didn't want to do that, but I also wanted to be in a space of where, hey, TJ, can you give us some tools that we can use to better to create an inclusive work environment? And so without, like, using him to do that, to be that spokesperson, TJ did that. He gave us tools. He had worked at the state. I contacted people at the state and said, hey, how did you do this? We attempted to, there were some staff who attempted to learn, not learn fully sign language, right? But just some things like thank you and, other hello or whatever else. So again, all these type of symbols and acts to ensure that TJ felt comfortable and felt included. And so while, that is TJ's, this position and TJ coming into the city was such a value add to the city, it also showcases like how we can do this for all of us. And so you may or may not have a disability. It may not be, something that fits into a certain category, but all of us are different people and have different needs. And when I think about equity, when I think about fairness and justice and all of that, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, this person needs something different than me. And that's okay if I offer that person an accommodation, not from a legal standpoint, but I mean that sometimes too. But I offer that person accommodation so that they can be successful in their work. And we need to be thinking about, as progressive as the city of St. Paul is, and the Twin Cities in general, we need this position, accessibility coordinator position, to ensure that we are intentional and that folks feel like, hey, I see something wrong. I mean, we got, I would chuckle with some of the work that was brought to me from TJ and their team around our parks and our parks facilities and some of our other facilities that I didn't even think about, that it wasn't even on my radar. And so we needed that position there. We needed TJ, we needed Mark. We need Mark, not needed. We need Mark and others to design and have a plan to how to create and ensure that the city is being intentional in the work. So I challenge you all, and I hope I'm answering all the questions. So please, help me with the questions as well. But I challenge you all to think about, when we talk about equity, we talk about inclusion and all the diversity and all those things. The Americans with Disability Act, they've been doing that. That was the intention the whole time. And when you think about disability, that is equity work. You're literally designing school systems, programs, environments, facilities with equity in mind, meeting people where they're at. And again, we separate that because it's like, oh, it's for people who are blind. Oh, it's for people who are hard of hearing. It's people who are in a wheelchair. It's people, whatever. But no, it's actually for all of us. And we all take advantage of the amenities or the restructuring of spaces to help us survive and be easier. But it's in particular for the people who need it. And so my challenge to you all is to continue to be intentional around your office environments and the spaces that you create. And that is a way of continuing this work. And you will have a better work environment. The studies all show, if you're intentional in the spaces that you create, intentional with people in mind, their humanity in mind, not from people like to use all these political words around socialism and whatever else, or handouts, whatever. It's just for people to survive. It really is for people to be able to live in this country, to live in this space, to work in this space. And I don't know about you all, I want that. I want for folks to be able to do what they need to do and have what they need to have. I don't see that as a challenge. I don't see that if they have it, then I don't. Well, I don't need it. I don't need that. So if you need it, I want you to have it. And so think about the role that you play in your respective work environments and how you can be intentional around creating a work environment that is inclusive, that's positive, that is growth-minded, wanting people to grow, wanting people to be respected, wanting people to be included in the space and feeling welcome. And that takes work. That's not just we had a potluck and so everybody feels that they're included. Potlucks is fun, food is good, but it takes more than that. And don't take for granted that folks are okay. So you have to create the spaces to say are people okay? And if they say no, ask them what they need. This is very simple stuff. There's nothing complicated about this, but we make it complicated because maybe our experience has been limited. Maybe we haven't been around other people, whatever that may mean for you. And so I challenge you also. I teach at St. Thomas, and we have a diversity course, right, of the class, and I always like to do something different. But I tell people, and not from a performative standpoint, but I talk to my students about hang around other people that are different from you. So yeah, we're talking about race, of course. Yes, we're talking about gender, of course. But political views, I know, shocking. Religious views. Hang around people who are different from you, who see the world differently from you, and I guarantee you that it will be educational for you, and you will see the world and engage in the world in a different way because you've had that experience. But if you don't have that experience, then you get into this kind of like, well, maybe we want to save the poor people or save those people over there. They don't need you saving them. They need for you to make sure that we're creating a space so that they can be a part of it in addition to you. And so, but that takes effort. If you look around in your spaces and everybody looks like you or are able-bodied people like you, change that up. Because otherwise, we're not going to be able to create the environment that we want. We're not, and that's both socially. I'm talking about at home too. Your home environment influences what you do at work, and vice versa. So, home, social, church, all of those things. Wherever you're at, religious or not religious, where you go out for the breweries, whatever that looks like for you, ensure that your environment is not homogenous. Because I think that's one of the ways that this world and the state of the world will change, that we're in will change. Until that happens collectively, largely, and I'm talking about in number, then we're going to continue to be in the space that we're in, where everybody's in a box, or we live on one side of the river or one side of the neighborhood. We'll continue to be in the places where we feel comfortable, and we have to challenge ourselves to think outside of our environment and our comfort level and get comfortable with other and whatever that means for you. And so that is something, I served as a chief equity officer and the work that I'm in right now, but that's something that I continue to work on. If I look around, I'm like, oh, I need to make sure that where's my friend circle here? Where am I meeting people of a different religion than me? Race and gender, yes, all of those things, but it goes beyond that. There's a lot of intersections between that, challenging yourself. And so, yes, we started with here, the accessibility coordinator. We had folks who had lived experience, and that was such a eye-opening moment for us. And I hope that hearing, my experience and what we had in my short stint in HREEO and thinking about our spaces, my hope is that you'll start to think about hey, we do a lot of PowerPoints. Do we need captions on those? We're doing a lot of whatever. Do we need to change that? Because some people may not like to hear my voice the whole time. Maybe they want to read it. Whatever that looks like. Start changing your spaces, and I guarantee you that it's going to create a positive, inclusive work environment. I appreciate y'all having me here, and I'll pass it back over to Mark if that works.
I'm excited to introduce our next guest, a person who has dedicated her career to championing accessibility, social justice, and disability justice. She also has a career that includes time with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, Department of Transportation, and a Bush Fellowship. She's currently the Chief Program Officer at the ARC Minnesota, an organization that does transformative work within our communities. Please welcome Thor.
Well, thank you, Mark. Want to thank you and the rest of your team and the City of St. Paul for hosting this event today and inviting me and the rest of the other speakers. It's truly a real pleasure to be here with all of you today. So I'm Mai, and I am the Chief Program Officer with the ARC Minnesota, And I'll tell you a little bit more about what the ARC is in just a second. But just so I have a good idea of who's in the room, how many of y'all are like in public works? Oh, stop being shy. Raise your hand high. Okay. Okay. What about other folks? HR? A lot of folks from HR. Throw out some other departments that you're with. Oh. We like you guys, but we don't know what you do. But you're important. What else? Public health. Oh, awesome. Great. Anything else? Library. Parks. Great. All right, so human rights. Yes, Beth in the back. Yeah, so great. That's a good mix of folks, and I'm sure there are other probably areas of focus represented today from the city of St. Paul. I am a resident of St. Paul, just so you know, and I don't like crossing the river to that other place. So, yeah. So, like I said, I am the Chief Program Officer with ARC Minnesota. I'm still very new to ARC. I was actually, as Mark mentioned a little bit, I was with the state of Minnesota for about 10 years. About 3.5 was spent at the Department of Human Rights, where I worked a little bit with Beth. And, you know, I'm sure you all have worked with Beth in some capacity. I think we all know how she is, right? Right? No, she's amazing. She's amazing. I love Beth. So I've been with ARC for about 7 months now, and so what do I do at ARC? I oversee all of our programs, and so that really just means that there are a bunch of staff who do all the work, and I just sort of like get updates from them. But I'll tell you a little bit about what our programs are. So there are 3 of them. We have our public policy program. We have our advocacy and community engagement program, and then we also have our contract services program, which includes various contracts that we hold through either the state of Minnesota or other places. And so that includes work that involves housing and employment. We've got a really robust microgrant program where we issue out small grant money to people with disabilities to reach their employment or housing goals. We have a program called the Minnesota Inclusion Initiative, which is also another grant program, a microgrant program, where we issue out grant money to disability organizations that are ran by and for people with disabilities. And we also have our regional quality councils, which are stationed throughout the state. ARC is a statewide organization, and so those councils exist through statute to, be able to address issues in their community when that are impacting people with disabilities. So those councils consist of like probably local government people who work for local government, caseworkers, obviously disabled people themselves, family members, things like that. So there, as you can tell, there's a lot going on at ARC. I would say that we have a lot of work that's forward-facing that you're probably more familiar with, which might include our policy work because we're very active every year at the legislature, advocating for good legislation that helps people with disabilities and opposing legislation that might harm people with disabilities. But we also have 3 Value Village thrift stores. One in New Hope. Got to cross the river, I'm sorry, guys. New Hope, Bloomington, and Richfield. So if you're ever out and about and you wanting to go thrifting, choose Value Village because you know your money is going to a good cause. So that's a little bit about ARC. And I don't know, what am I supposed to answer, Mark? Do I have a question? So I guess I just, I'll say that, I've worked a lot with local government in the past. I used to work at the Metropolitan Council doing regional, long-range regional planning. My focus was community engagement, and at the time that I worked at the Met Council, they had just rolled out their equity plan, right? And how to achieve equity throughout the metropolitan region. And so I was connecting quite often with communities, going out into the communities and meeting with people, especially when it involved, going into neighborhoods and developing neighborhoods and, creating facilities of some kind or other, whether it was a transit facility or, just a pedestrian walkways, those kind of bike pathways. I was involved in all of that and did engagement in all of that. So I know a little bit about, especially for those of you who are in public works, looking at things through an equity lens, and in particular, a disability lens. And so then I went to human rights for a little bit, and after that, I actually went to MnDOT and continued some of the work that I did on accessibility and inclusion and equity with MnDOT. And it's kind of amazing because it's a small world in the transportation world, right, and public works world. I always run into people that I know. And every time I am in circles where gatherings like this happen, but they're all like, transit and transportation people and public works people, we always talk about equity, right? We always talk about inclusion. We always talk about, well, how can we do things better? Or how can we, create something to enhance our equity, to enhance, being welcoming and inclusive in our communities. And every year, it was the same conversation. I think one of the things that I feel like is real key when you're in public service, no matter what it is, whether you're in finance or HR or public works or whatever, right? I think, you have to go into it with the mindset of like, you need to include the people who are most impacted in the work that you're doing in order to be able to do it right, right? And leadership of the most impacted is actually one of the principles in disability justice. And, if those of you who aren't familiar with disability justice, I can explain that to you later. I'm sure it might come up when we have our panel anyway, but that's really important because I think we get caught up in the work that we do every day, and we get caught up in the red tape and the technicalities and the codes and the compliance and all that, that we forget that we're actually like, the work that we do impacts like actual people's lives, like, because we're all humans. And, I've been in a room full of like transit people before, and, my message to the transit world is it's not about buses, it's not about trains, it's not about, the light rail and how they look and how they feel inside and the layout and what station is where and stuff. It's about people, right? People getting where they need to be. It's about people accessing their community. People needing to just like be able to live their lives that they want to live. And so when you involve leadership of the most impacted in the work that you do from the very beginning, then I think you're off to a good start, right? And, lots of times in the work that I've done in planning, community engagement and planning, disability is like an afterthought. It's not involved at the very beginning. People with disabilities are not, we don't have a space at the table usually. And, I've seen it with my very own eyes where, plans are put in place and like a prototype will be, created and it's presented And it's like, okay, but where are the accessibility features, right? Well, that they weren't there because nobody bothered to talk to people with disabilities to begin with. And so I think that, you have to really integrate that intentionally and, be mindful of that, because the only people who understand what their needs are the most are the people who are actually living with those experiences, right? And it's the same with people with disabilities. We know how, we know what we need. We know our access needs. We know what we need as far as accommodations, all that stuff. We know we need to get across the street, right? And that could include a number of things, whether it's a curb cut or whatever, right? But you're not going to be able to do it right unless you ask people with disabilities. And I know that St. Paul has done lots of things in the past where you're going through neighborhoods and you're developing and things like that. And I've been a part of some of that work too. I've been invited in certain spaces with the city of St. Paul to do like focus groups or to just engage with community members. And, I would encourage you to continue to do that, but like to even like double your efforts, because right now it's a kind of a scary time for people with disabilities, right? And we're feeling like we're being shut out and we're feeling vilified right now. And so I think right now, more than ever, is a time when we're going to be leaning on all of you to understand that we need to work collaboratively and to be able to, be partners from beginning to end and obviously throughout, right? So, and, Mark talked about, the notion of the ADA and how it's obviously a landmark civil rights law that changed the lives of people with disabilities. I remember life without the ADA because I'm that old. But life was tough, right? Life was tough without the ADA. And I love the ADA. I love the fact that, it was a law that a lot of people with disabilities fought very hard to get passed. But it is just the bare minimum, okay? And, I want you all to remember that. In Minnesota, we're very lucky because we actually set very high standards, right, as far as accessibility requirements on top of what ADA already outlines, right? So I think we're doing good on that front, but as we are seeing being played out in real time in this moment in history, no matter what kind of law we got, it's always at risk of being taken away, right? Of being defunded, of being just, broken down. And so I think, we're going to lean on all of you to work with us on, making sure that doesn't happen for our St. Paul residents and for everybody who lives in Minnesota, because that's a real thing, it's legit, and it's a threat. So yeah, just remember that the ADA is wonderful, but it is the bare minimum, and we always want to shoot for going above and beyond what's outlined in the ADA. And also, just to go back to what the ADA was intended for, in the spirit of I think the ADA gets lost in all of the technical requirements. And, ADA does help improve the lives of people with disabilities, but the spirit in which it was created was, inclusion and, protection, and, just making sure that people with disabilities are seen equal under the law along with other protected classes, right? But, I think the spirit of that really what does that really mean? It means that, I think we are people who, deserve to live our lives the way we want to live, but at the same time, we also struggle in that, and we need that law, that policy, in order to boost our protection, right? But also, I think, a lot of people don't understand that the ADA, even though in the spirit that it was created was for full inclusion, it actually has posed problems for folks who are marginalized, in addition to having disabilities. They maybe identify with other, classes, including gender, race, all that sort of stuff. And I think a lot of people forget that disability is an identity, just as people identify with their race or their gender or, whatever. And ADA doesn't quite touch that piece of it, right? Because people with disabilities are not a monolith. We have multiple identities. For myself, I identify as a disabled Hmong woman. And, I think the ADA doesn't touch some of those underlying identity issues that exist for all people with disabilities. That we all have inherent value and that we're not disposable and that we are all essential. And that's more on disability justice, not disability rights. And so if you could kind of put those two together as you continue to do the work that you do, which, we're all very appreciative of, I think that would be a really wonderful way to approach the work of accessibility, because there is the identity side of disability, but there is also that side that is more compliance and regulatory, right? So we just have to bring that together. So I don't know what else to add. I mean, I feel like I rambled on. But yeah, I'm sticking around for the whole thing today. So if you have questions for me, please ask whenever we have an opportunity. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over back to Mark.
Now, as some of you know, and some of you have even worked directly with me on, the city is in the midst of a major push toward improving accessibility across the board. Every city has what's called an ADA transition plan. It's kind of like what the city is planning on improving over the course of time. Normally, the ADA improvements are usually pretty cut and dry things like curb cuts and handrails and, bathroom stalls and things like that, all very important, all great. But what the ADA often fails to address, at least in the letter of the law, is the hidden disabilities and the hidden barriers that people face every day. Beyond simple, or not simple, but beyond mobility considerations, right? There's all sorts of disabilities that don't actually involve one's mobility. So what St. Paul is trying to do at this point is, have an ADA transition plan for every single one of your departments. All of your departments have an ADA liaison that works with me. Those liaisons probably have teams within the department that are looking at not only the facilities, because some departments really don't have a public-facing facility, but the services that you provide, the programs that you run, the information that you put out. And it is rare, if I don't even think it exists at all, for every department within a city to have an ADA plan. So St. Paul is setting a pretty high bar with the examples that we show. There's no, what does it mean for our water department to improve accessibility? What does it mean for our financial services department to improve accessibility? Or our police, our libraries? It's not just about the buildings themselves and the spaces that they are, but what do we do within those buildings? How do we serve the public? What are the programs that we plan for? Who are those programs for? And the answer should be for everyone, right? So I want to have a panel discussion with a few representatives from our community. You met you've met Toni, but I also want to introduce two more panelists, both of whom are on the Mayor's Advisory Council for People with Disabilities. First, Frances Lane. She's a recent transplant to St. Paul from Connecticut. She's an active member at the MACPD, and she's always looking to become more active in city programs. As someone who lost her sight later in life, she uses adaptive technology like screen readers to access info and to get around the city. And she's always sure to let me know where the barriers arise in our own city websites and information. So she's been a very valuable asset to us as a city to kind of point out where some of those blind spots are, no pun intended. And her insight and contributions are invaluable to our efforts to improve digital accessibility especially. So Frances Lane, if you'd like to come on up, take a seat. And then Jillian Nelson is a co-chair of the MACPD and a policy director at the Autism Society of Minnesota. She's a tireless disability advocate, and among other things, she's helped draft the legislation that creates real change for the better within our state, such as the required autism training for all police officers. That was the work of Jillian Nelson. So welcome, Jillian. So as the accessibility coordinator, whose goal is to improve access throughout St. Paul, I can't just sit there at my desk and think like, oh, here's what we should do. The insight comes from engaging with the community, listening to people, asking questions. Toni, if you'd like to come on up too. Oh, sorry. You already got your intro. So. Toni Newborn, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to do just that. We're going to kind of take this from a few different points of view, a few different intersections from the disability community, and really focus on where do those barriers lie, right? It's not always a curb or a step or a lack of a handrail or a heavy door. Sometimes it's in the form of a web page or a PDF or a swim lesson. So let's talk to these folks here. My first question, we'll start with a question for Frances. Oh, and you guys have two mics between the two of you. So if Frances and Mai want to pass one back and forth, and Jillian and Toni can share one as well. So just pass those back and forth. Frances, in what ways have you experienced being denied access to something because of your disability?
Okay, well, I do have to say, so I come from Stamford, Connecticut. That's where I grew up at, and I just moved out here a little less than a year ago. I have to say, I feel like Dorothy, where it was like, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. I have to tell you, it is totally different out here. I'm completely thrown. And when I first came out, because I served on the Mayor's Advisory Council in Stamford, nowhere near anything that is being proposed out here. We had some kind of high ideals, but, it wasn't going to work out. Come out here, I go to this first meeting at the MACPD last October. I was like, sign me up. I want to be a member of this council because I've been involved with a lot of the city happenings and so on in Stamford, wanted to be involved with boards and commissions, and I was looked at as if I was asking for $1 million or something. They couldn't understand why you're disabled. Why would you want to be serving on a board or commission? They didn't know what to do with me. I had to explain to them, because I'm blind, I just really need to have things in print that are accessible so that I can actually, read and be ready to serve and contribute to the meetings. And actually that was kind of a heavy pull just to even get that. So here I think it's going to be different. And I'm looking forward to just hopefully turning this around and working with a group of people who actually are aware that there are disabled people out here that just want to be included into the fabric of life here.
Thanks, Frances. Jillian, did you want to answer that question? How have you, or in what ways have you experienced being denied access to something because of your disability?
So yeah, I absolutely want to answer that. My primary disability that I've lived with the longest, I'm multiply disabled. I've recently been diagnosed with a lot of chronic illness issues and a lot of that have impacted mobility on an intermittent basis. But primarily, I've lived my whole life autistic and with ADHD, and it's been really challenging. Like I grew up with a hippie mother. Knowing my dad was a PCA, my mom worked in disability services, I knew about all the rights and all the protections, but I grew up around a lot of people with physical disabilities where people would fall all over themselves to make sure they had the accommodations. Oh, do we need to open the door? Do we need to get a ramp? What do we need to do? But then when I was diagnosed autistic when I'm in my 20s, because late diagnosis when you were born in 82 isn't unusual, and I started being able to request accommodations, it didn't really go like that. The ADA is a fantastic bill. It has opened up so many doors, literally and figuratively, for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, the ADA is actually an incredibly ableist piece of legislation. It only outlined what accommodations and accessibility look like for people with disabilities that at the time our government deemed worthy of contributing to society. So people with physical access needs, or people with visual access needs, or hearing access needs, like all those things are concretely outlined in the ADA. But for people with more invisible disabilities, or disabilities that fall under that realm of intellectual disability or developmental disability, or impact anything to do with your brain, because capitalism in your brain, that's all that really matters, there's absolutely no guidance. Our accessibility is covered under that really tiny line that says other reasonable accommodations as requested. But when you go to a place that has ADA, that they believe they're in compliance with the ADA, and you request accommodations and you cite the ADA, you're told, well, no, we don't have to do that. We're already in compliance. Look at our wonderful ramp. Well, your wonderful ramp is great. I'm really happy it's there. But as an autistic person with sensory needs, that doesn't actually help me. As an autistic person calling like a call center and dealing with something very stressful and having some challenges in maintaining emotional regulation, the fact that you hang up on me because I'm dysregulated because of my disability your ramp doesn't help me. Your bathroom doesn't help me. Your handicap parking doesn't help me as an autistic adult. And when you ask for accommodations, you end up having to prove and fight and beg. And by the time you actually maybe get the accommodation you need, there's so much trauma that it's almost impossible to even engage with it. Like I like to use the example of my gym in St. Paul. I went back there after COVID with my PCA because I need a PCA to keep me on track and those types of things and support me in a bunch of different areas. And I ran into a good friend of mine who's a wheelchair user, and she was there with her PCA. And ironically, she was just there with her PCA because her PCA wanted to swim too. Like, she actually transfers in and out of the pool independently. She gets herself dressed independently. She didn't actually need a ton of support, but she went through her whole workout. No one said a word to her. I walk in with my PCA as an appearing and non-disabled person. I was 5 minutes into my workout, and they pulled me out of the pool and told me I couldn't have my PCA with me. I'm like, well, according to the governor, like, this is like what they say. Like, I can have my PCA with me. Like, these are the guidelines from the state. And they're like, well, we know what they are. Like, but that's for people with disabilities. I'm like, I am a person with a disability. That is how I qualify to have this PCA. Here is a paycheck stub. And like, it became such a thing. It went on for 6 weeks before they finally were like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. You can have your PCA. Of course I'm right. I was on the commission that helped write the guidance to the gyms from the governor's office. And like, that's the common experience when you have an invisible disability. Like, there's a saying in the autism community that none of us, we don't actually know what autism looks like in an adult by itself, because every autistic adult also has trauma from trying to navigate this world that is clearly not made for us, with people that clearly do not understand us. And yeah, it's a exhausting way to exist. So eventually you just stop trying to access things unless it's absolutely detrimental, because every piece of access is this worth the trauma it's going to cause?
Thanks, Jillian. This next question's for Toni, as someone from the public sector side of things. What signals to you that a city or a business or an organization is doing their due diligence to try to engage in equitable and accessible practices for the public?
Oh, okay. I think that, so having, I'm going to give you the typical sort of government response of like having a committee. The committee that is housed out of HREEO is one. It's not the end all be all, but at least there's a baseline attempt of having a committee with community members living with disabilities or are connected to organizations for folks with disabilities. I think that's a first step. I think that having obviously this is something that I was very passionate about, having the equity change team and forming that and being intentional around that, having a employee resource network or an employee resource group. These are things that are like just basic, right? Nothing like, oh my gosh, the city has, these groups. You should have the groups, right? And being intentional around who's on those groups. The next sort of level from that is, how are you utilizing those groups? Are they effectuating change in policy? So we have the employee resource networks, we have the disability and the age community, the boards and commissions, but how are they actually changing policy in the city? Because if that's not happening, then this is like, it's just performative. So I think you have the committees, you've created the structure for those committees to be successful, and a budget. Let's talk about the money piece, no free 99 situations. This takes money to be able to do and to actually make the changes, not just to sit and talk about what needs to be changed. It takes money to be able to do that, but then there needs to be connection. I'll speak from talent and equity resources / human resources. Then what my expectation is, and when I, was a part of forming the employee resource network kind of process, was for those groups to tell me what I need to do, because I don't know. I don't pretend to know all of the things that need to be changed, but I need for somebody to tell me and raise their hand and say, hey, how you do your PowerPoints? It's not, and I know I keep talking about PowerPoints, but that's like simple stuff that we use all the time, but we forget that there are various ways to present information, and the PowerPoint is not the only way, but if you're going to use it, think about ways to use it so that everyone can read it and can hear it, can listen to it, et cetera.
I'll add PDFs to that situation too.
PDFs. When we moved into hybrid or virtual, and not everybody, but when we started doing more virtual meetings during the pandemic, we were doing a lot of screen time. Well, at some point our communications team was like, hey, we need to have captions. And we started doing a lot of community events virtually. We weren't thinking about how to connect with everybody. We were only connecting with people who can hear, see, all of the things that are quote unquote normal for us, right? And so I think that the groups are good, baseline, and then how are those groups, and how is the enterprise of St. Paul, HR, all of our different departments, the mayor's office, how are we connecting with those groups to change policy and ensure that there's a follow-up too, because sometimes we do stuff, it's like, hooray, we did it, like one thing, right? Whatever. We did it. There's a whole bunch of other things. So it's got to be continuous. It has to be continuous conversations. And so I think that those are, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones that I'm missing, but for me, that's just like basic. And we need to have folks saying to the administration, the powers that be who are involved, and not just from a performative standpoint, oh, like, hooray, we have a commission. How are they doing, making changes to the city, to the enterprise? And not just on their backs, right? Because I'm the one that's in the position. I have the positional power to make the change. So I need to be listening. I need to be proactive in the work that I'm doing. And I need to be making the changes and approving the changes so that we are creating a more inclusive environment.
Thanks, Toni.
I just want to add to that too. I think it's really important in how things present. In this month of July, there were 3 separate proclamations issued, one by Ramsey County, one by the City Council, and one by the Mayor's Office. I was absolutely floored when I saw the picture of the county is giving out their proclamation to a bunch of disability service workers, which are literally the people who make disabled people's lives a lot harder. So thank you for recognizing Disability Pride Month with the people that make us hard. But then like St. Paul got it absolutely right. Like they went above and beyond just the mayor's proclamation and brought in like the people with disabilities that are working to make the community a better place and said, hey, we thank you. So like being really visible in like when you're talking about disabilities, if I'm watching a meeting on TV and I see people with disabilities showing up and being a part of the conversation, I'm going to trust that city a lot more than if I see them talking to the people that hold power over people with disabilities. Because the people that hold power over us think they know what's best for us and how our lives should be lived, but often we are in direct conflict with them and spend a lot of time trying to change that. So really recognizing that it's the people living that have the experience, not the people that serve us.
Thanks, Jillian.
And can I just add one other thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Francis.
Okay, so when you guys are doing these PowerPoints and I'm listening over Zoom or whatever, it would just be really great if you actually read the whole screen of what you have on there, because a lot of times it'd be like, well, I'm going to skip this. You guys can look at it later. And I'm wondering what was on that particular screen before you move to the next one. So.
Good point, yeah. This next question's for Mai. So Francis, if you could pass that mic to your left. Mai, as a representative from the ARC, what advice would you give a city that is looking to move well beyond the ADA compliance and plan spaces and services that feel genuinely accessible and equitable?
Okay. That's like a pie in the sky kind of question there, Mark.
Just think it like best case scenario. What can we do?
Well, I've been lucky to be able to travel all over the country, and so I've seen infrastructure in communities where there's not as much investment in how cities are made accessible. And I always come home and I think, as much as we still have to improve in Minnesota, we're doing a lot of things right. So I think, we're doing the things right, but that doesn't mean that we have to just stay at that level, right? Like we could always be better. And yeah, I think, at ARC, we're always trying to do better. And I hear what you're saying, Toni, about is the work we're putting in place actually making a difference, or are we just doing it to make ourselves look good, right? Is it performative? And I think that philosophy can be applied to anything, really. I know at ARC, we're in the middle of, really being intentional and putting in policies and practices that make us authentic in how we're trying to achieve our mission, right? And so, and I think that that applies to government entities as well. There's so many things that make government entities different from the private sector, but I do feel that being performative is easy, and I think a lot of people in the community kind of see through that, because when you don't follow through with what you're saying you're going to do, then people take notice, right? And so, at ARC, I'm working hard with our leadership to put in place, policies that are authentic and that holds ourselves accountable. And so I guess that might be a good step for anybody, for St. Paul included. Hold yourselves accountable. Hold yourselves accountable to the people who live in this city. I love St. Paul. I think we're a community that's hardworking and very salt of the earth sort of people. I've lived in St. Paul pretty much all my adult life. And, you know, the people in Minneapolis are weird. Let's just say that out loud, right? But in a good way. I'm not saying that in a bad way. But like, I love people. I love the St. Paul people. They're my kind of people. And we want our city, the leaders that help run our city, to involve us. And, you know, I just remember when, you know, George Floyd was killed, and, you know, I remember Philando. You know, we all came together for that, right? Especially Philando. And I feel like disability should not be any different. Like, we should all come together to make sure that we are accountable to ourselves when we're saying that we're going to do something, and to make sure that we do it, and to be authentic in it, and to make sure that we have measurable outcomes to back that up also. So, yeah, I think that's sort of a non-answer to my answer.
I'm just going to add to that from a practical standpoint. I've gotten the privilege to work with a lot of different planning committees on a lot of different things coming into like disability focus groups, everything from parks to transportation planning, not just with St. Paul, but throughout the state. And I have a great question for all of you. When we're trying to plan an inclusive park, when we're trying to plan inclusive roads and sidewalks, why are we doing one focus group with the disabled community after doing 10 with just members of the community who are just average non-disabled? If you want an inclusive community, if you want to know how to make that playground inclusive, how to make the sidewalks inclusive, how to make the plan inclusive, just stop talking to non-disabled people. If you go and just do all your focus groups within the disability community, it's going to be functional for the entire community. Nobody ever came into an accessible space and said, wow, I'm not disabled and this doesn't suit my needs at all. This is horrible. It's far too accessible. My day's been ruined. Like, everybody benefits from accessibility. So let's start with the disability community. I mean, typically, like, we bring in all these groups to get outside perspectives, but you guys are, for the most part, most teams are made up of average people without disabilities that have kids, that have lives. You already have that perspective within your team. Focus on getting the perspectives of those who are most marginalized, because like disability justice says, if you plan and work towards the goals of those who are most marginalized, everybody will be okay. So let's stop wasting the time talking to like the soccer moms and figuring out what she needs in a playground. I'll tell you, talk to the disability community. We're going to tell you what you need. And answer number one is a fence. You cannot call any playground accessible until you fence it in, because autistic children are not safe there until you fence it in. And dear God, do not put it next to a body of water. Call it accessible and not put a fence on it. That's all you're doing is setting up our kids to die. So, like, and this is what we see across the state, and it's all because you talk to maybe 8 people in the disability community, 100 people without disabilities. Switch that around, and you're going to end up with a really, really great city.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, Jillian. Francis,
And
go
we're
ahead.
all really opinionated.
That's why you're here.
So what I wanted to add was I was in Connecticut, I did have some groups of people that did help me and, you know, supported me, and I did serve on a couple of boards and commissions on the Charter Revision Commission, and then also on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board. So I did have that support, but like I said, it was really, they found it really surprising that someone who was blind and they weren't sure what to do with me, why would I want to serve voluntarily? Because there, they don't pay per diems or stipends. You are told if you want to serve, then you know you're doing it with no enumeration. So now I've come here and I'm feeling very positive. I'm hoping to get involved with some of the same things I built expertise in charter, in the Charter Commission, or planning, land use, so on like that. And I'm hoping I'm not going to run into the same barriers I did back in Connecticut. That yes, as long as I have things that are in an accessible format that I can, read with my readers and so on. I can contribute just as any other sighted person, and that even as I'm older, so I'm retired. So yes, it's great, that you have the support to work and to do those things if that's what you need to do, is to perform and be out in the community. I'm at an older age, I'm retired, but I still want to serve the city, and also would want to be able to not have barriers in serving on a board or commission. So I'm crossing my fingers.
Francis, while you have the mic, can you give us an example of type of accommodation that you have asked for to access a service or program in the past, and if you've ever had a hard time getting granted that accommodation?
Well, in Connecticut, again, it was really as simple as that I was able to get on the trust fund board, and that person, and I felt it was intentional, but they just, all I really needed at that time was this to make, because with a lot of documents that had to be read, you're listening through a lot of what the developers, financing, so on like that, as to whether we're going to award a grant or not. And just to get all this paperwork, just to have it mailed to me, in a timely fashion, so that I could actually go through all the numbers, understand what was going on, and it was a struggle. We went from where I couldn't even get any documents at all for the first almost 5 months. I'm screaming and yelling about it, and then it did get better, but it was a struggle. And here I've been trying to attend some of the council meetings, and I'm having a problem with the accessibility, online in order to get there. I'm still trying to get that worked out, so hopefully that will get solved pretty soon.
Mai, how about yourself? Can you give an example of any accommodations that you have asked for to access a service or program, and if you've ever had a hard time getting granted an accommodation?
Sure. Yeah, so I think for me, it's really been more an issue of whether I feel empowered enough to ask for an accommodation. And I think a lot of people with disabilities go through this. So for myself, I'm kind of a workhorse, right? I've worked forever, and I'm a high producer. And I also want to just put out and voice that I know that I'm a very privileged disabled person. And so, I have always made too much money to qualify for anything. So I don't even bother trying to navigate any of those systems, because I just know that I don't qualify. But I also, I think people with disabilities who are, employed feel as though they need to compensate and work even harder, because it's that internalized ableism thing, where you just feel like you need to prove yourself, and if you can prove it to yourself, then you can prove it to other people, right? That you're just as hard of a worker. And so, nowadays I don't feel that way, but maybe 20 years ago I probably felt that way about, the fact that I have to make my disability small in order to be able to fit in more, if that makes sense. And so that a symptom of that mindset, of that internalized ableism, is that you just stay quiet. You're not gonna, cause any trouble at work. You don't want to, rock the boat or anything, and you don't want your supervisor to make it seem like you're asking for something, because usually when you ask for something, the answer is no, right? So you just deal with it, and so that, I think that's been, in my lived experience, my struggle is like even getting to the point where you can ask for an accommodation, because you just, experience tells you that usually doesn't go well. And it's really ironic, because we've been talking a lot about COVID, and what did COVID teach us about accommodations?
They're so easy. If
they're so
everyone needs
easy.
it.
And then when able-bodied people needed an accommodation, then it was okay, right? Because disabled people have been asking for the same accommodations that everybody used during COVID all of our lives, but we've always been, given, we've always faced issues with that. So we know it's possible, right? And we know that it can be universal and that everybody can benefit. Just like Jillian said, when you are including people with disabilities in your planning and how you run your work environment, everybody benefits, right? I've never known in my work in disability amongst groups of disabled people that I've worked with, I've never known anybody to ever say, let's keep out those able-bodied people. Right? We're like, if you make things accessible, if you do things with a universal design mindset, then everybody benefits, no matter what age you are, what ability you have. And I think that's the lesson that came out of COVID. And I wish, we had learned that lesson a long time ago. It would have spared me a lot of headache throughout the years. But yeah, so I think for myself, I've always, I've never really had issues getting accommodations. It was always like, am I ready to deal with even asking for an accommodation from an employer?
Yeah, that's a good point about, feeling empowered to be able to comfortably ask for an accommodation. The city's always had an accommodation request form on the website. Until recently, it's been kind of buried in the HREEO portion of the site. You really have to seek it out or know what you're trying to look for if that's what you were trying to access. Recently, as part of our greater accessibility push, departments have been kind of putting it more front and center. Now it's at the bottom of no matter where you are on the website. There's an accessibility link to that page that gives you the links to the accommodation request forms. Tops of applications or QR codes on flyers. If you need an accommodation, scan here or click here, and all of a sudden, we're getting more accommodation requests than we've ever gotten. Yeah,
So I want to kind of speak to what Maya's saying about that empowerment. Like, as someone with a disability like autism, like the accommodation that I need most often is not one that you can put on a form and hope that someone gets. Like, I need an understanding world that's going to not judge me when I don't make eye contact, or when I go on too long about my special interest, or when I'm just very, very awkward. You can't put be kind and patient on every single form requesting accommodations. And like, to kind of speak to what Mai said, like, I spent a long time making my disability small too, and working really hard to try to be the poster child of what an autistic adult could be, in hopes that I could change the world for every single other autistic person, and we would be welcome in all these spaces if I could just sit in my chair just right, and I'll make just the right amount of eye contact, and I won't talk about the WNBA when I'm not supposed to. And then maybe I could open doors up for other autistic people. And what I actually found was, by doing that, I actually closed doors that autistic people were closing those doors for themselves, because they didn't know how to perform and mask at that level, and they didn't want to. And I realized, like, once I put it all down and I just showed up as my messy, chaotic self who will info dump on you for 45 minutes about the WNBA, or show up 20 minutes late, or take off my shoes in the middle of a presentation because they're bothering me, and I started showing up authentically autistic, that's when accessibility started coming more naturally into the world, because I wasn't trying to fit myself into something. And that's when more spaces started being created in the world, is when we show up authentically as ourselves disabled and stop trying to make ourselves small for the convenience of others, when realistically what we really just need to create an accessible world is kindness, patience, and curiosity. Like Toni said, accessibility isn't that hard. All you have to do is say, hey, what do you need? Can I help? And we'll tell you what we need and if you can help. That's simple. We've solved the whole problem of accessibility right now. Write that down.
I did. I appreciate all of those comments, and I just wanted to say, as an able-bodied person who's a manager, right? And I want to be careful about using the word ally. Sometimes I'm weirded out by that terminology, but if you like it, go with it. But more so from an advocate standpoint of like being a nice, kind human being who centers humanity of people. In the management, what I challenge our managers to do and our staff to do is like when an accommodation issue comes up and someone raises their hand and is empowered to do so, don't act crazy, right? And don't start thinking about like, oh, we can't do this. And then you start like retaliating. That's a legal term, right? In the illegal term, actually. So you cannot retaliate against people. So sometimes we get into these spaces where we're like, oh, she said she had a disability, she needs an accommodation, now we're not gonna get work done, and now whatever. Stop.
If you accommodate us, we're gonna get the work done.
You get the work done. How about that? That's the way to get the work done. But if you're only thinking about the work, that's a problem too. So you have people in jobs doing the work. So an accommodation is a good thing, not a bad thing. If you think it's a bad thing, you're on your way to a lawsuit or an EEOC complaint or a complaint from the Department of Human Rights. So we need to educate ourselves and make sure that, training doesn't solve for everything. You got to do the work on your own. You have to do the work on your own. So how you show up in these spaces, you have to do that work when you go home or whatever, weekends, whatever. And then as a city, we'll provide as much as we can. And there's always opportunities for growth there. You got to do the work on your own and come into these spaces. So I don't have to have a goofy conversation with you about how you can't retaliate against the person who raised their hand for an accommodation. You cannot do that. That shouldn't be your thought process of it. And if it is, or it has been, obviously, I'll say you need to stop, but we need to get to a place of education and training around what is it that you're trying to do, how do you best support that person from a kindness, humanity, centering our humanity standpoint, because the folks can still do the work. They're just saying that they need a tool or resource or whatever it is that they've said to be able to do the work well. And so for those who are out there who are in these positions of power and influence, and even if you're not, just wanting to make sure that you're supporting your coworker, we need to be in a place to where you're coming to the table, you're educating yourselves, you're putting in the work, but being mindful about that is another way of creating an inclusive work environment and not freaking out and not engaging into retaliation when it comes up, when folks your staff are feeling empowered to say, hey, this is something that I need. Stay in the space of curiosity, lean into the space of like, I actually want to give you the accommodation. Now, yes, we gotta go through the goofy process, interactive process, all that kind of stuff. But you want to accommodate them. Instead of looking for ways to not accommodate the person, look for ways to where you can accommodate them so that we can continue doing the work. It's a different mindset, it's a different approach, and it can be done. And most of it is simple. There's some things that can be complicated, but like you lean into figuring out and getting to a solution that's mutually agreeable and acceptable with the employee. It can be done. And in our team and working with HREEO as well, there's a process for that. You gotta lean in, and you have to lean in from a standpoint of like, I want to do this, and I will do this, not figuring out ways to put up blockers.
And Toni, on that, what you're kind of describing is a culture shift from, accessibility on request to universal design for inclusion from the very start, from the decision-making process to the way that we build out our spaces and plan our services. What advice would you give, we're all city employees here, or some of us are boards and commissions. What advice would you give, because we all play a part in this, to shift it from a culture of accessibility upon request, maybe, to an accessible universal design?
Sure. It's similar to what I said before. You got to do the work on your own. You know, I know in this equity space, it used to be like, we're not in the business of changing hearts and minds, but hearts and minds need to be changed to be able to do the work. I'm in the business of you need to change your hearts and mind. You have to do the work at home, on the weekends, or whatever else. You need to diversify your environment and who you are around, who you socialize with, who you are friends with, who you are in community with, whatever that looks like. Because when you come into the space, then it's easier for us to create this environment. It's easier for us to create the policies. But if you're like, oh, that's just something St. Paul does, you know, I just do that at work, that's problematic. We're not gonna get there. So you gotta do the work at home. You gotta do the work with your family. You gotta diversify who you're around and the experiences. I didn't say this earlier. My uncle, who passed away during the pandemic, was blind. It was an accidental shooting in his eye. He was blind at age 16. He navigated life as a blind person. But my uncle could tell you which streets to turn on. He'd get in the car and be like, make a right, left, all of that. And I knew he was blind, obviously, so I wasn't blind to it, right? Not to use the word twice. But I also recognized, and I was around, and not just around him once a year, he was a part of our family. So I was able to see, like, how does Uncle Chris live life, and what role can I play to ensure that when he needs help, I can be there to provide it to him. When he doesn't need help, I can just be there to support him and whatever else. That's a family member, but I'd say that's an experience that I had that now shapes how I live life and the environments that I create. And so I encourage you all to do that. Similar to what I said before, which is be intentional around the environment. Like, you've gone to this presentation, this panel, you've heard us talk and advocate, do something about it. Go back to your respective teams and say, hey, went to this amazing training, I went to this amazing discussion with these amazing panel members here, and I need to do something. What's my role in this? Because each one of us has a role. If you're like, oh, that's Beth's role because she's the manager, she'll take care of that. It's all of our roles and responsibility to change the environment. And so you've often heard the mayor talk about, you know, we want to create a city that works for all of us, so all of us have to get to work. If you want the culture to change, you need to get to work. Because Toni, Director of Talent and Equity Resources, yep, great, all this experience, and I'm giving a good talk right now, but I don't know all the things. I don't. And if you don't tell me the things that I need to know, or that your experiences, if I'm not doing the work either to make sure that I'm coming into the space to make the changes, then the changes won't happen, and I can't be solely responsible for those changes. And so I need you. We need you collectively to be in your respective workspaces, to raise the hand when the hand needs to be raised, to challenge me to raise my own hand, to do the work. I think all of us collectively are responsible and have some ownership in creating this culture. And then I need to go in my respective shop to make sure that I'm not relying on people to raise their hand, and the processes are so rigid that I have to wait on people to tell me that I need to create an inclusive work environment. So I think that it's multi-layered. Do the work at home. Make sure that your circles and your community is truly diverse in the greatest extent, to the greatest extent of what the definition of diversity is. And then we go back to our spaces and create the environment that we want. And then from a policy procedural standpoint, ensuring that those processes, policies, and procedures are changed and reflect an inclusive environment and the broader community, not a specific community.
I think, too, another piece to add on that, in creating this culture, historically, the disability community, we've been looked at, especially in the employment sector, as a risk and a liability. We're categorized by our diagnosis and our accommodations. Stop looking at us like that. We are our own culture. Like, we don't categorize and list out deficits of any other diverse culture in the workforce. Like we look and say, okay, these are different cultural needs. Okay, we need to have a prayer room for our Muslim employees. We might need to adjust some holiday schedules for our Jewish employees. We accept and embrace those cultures, and we don't even blink twice about accommodating something that is a part of a person's culture. But when we talk about disability, all people see is a medical diagnosis. Stop. We're a culture. We have our own language. We have our own traditions. We have our own values. We have our own beliefs. And if you start looking at us instead of these people who have been horrifically struck down with this disability that makes their life so much harder, which, yeah, sometimes it's harder, but also there's really great things about living with my disability, things I wouldn't change for anything. Because I am part of such a beautiful, vibrant culture that's about survival, that's about inclusion, that's about acceptance, that it has a vibrant history of how we got to where we are. And if you look at us and you see that culture of survivor, you see that culture of innovation, because, dear God, disabled people are going to be the most innovative people you've ever met, because we've had to be. Like, that's the only way we're going to survive in this world. Like, so look at us from the culture we come from, and not just as a diagnosis and a liability and a risk. And that is a great step towards creating the culture you're looking for, is to see us as people and a community, not just a list of accommodations.
And may I add here, so I'm new out here, but I would have to say, taking on what Jillian was just saying, this also needs to be rolled out into the housing and the landlords. Because what I'm noticing here is they look at us as liabilities also, and if you ask for an accommodation, they're afraid to grant it because they think the other neighbors are going to look at and think that you're getting a special treatment, so on like that. And because when I first was going to move out here, I'm coming from Connecticut, so I'm trying to do things, through mail and email. And when I started asking about accommodation for a washer and dryer or something along those lines, I could tell they were going to hold up my application to get on wait list if I kept pushing that. So I ended up dropping the whole thing and not even mentioning it. So I've been out here now, and I can tell they still are not interested at all in hearing about any accommodation. So I've worked around that. And I have like a portable washer machine now. I've done some other things in order to mitigate not having an air conditioner, et cetera. And yeah, we are probably some of the most innovative people, because you have to do all these workarounds, because sometimes people just don't want to hear, what you might need. So like to see somebody talking to these landlords out here, letting them know that they need to be, a little bit more accommodating and understanding.
Thanks, guys. I want to open it up out to you folks. You've all been sitting there so attentively. Does anyone have any questions for any of the panelists or all of the panelists sitting up here? All right. Well, why don't I do one more? I'd like to hear from everybody on this.
We got a question.
What's
We have
that?
two?
Oh, sorry. I didn't see you back there. Can we hear her? I'll repeat it. Why don't you?
So I know there's like the mayor's commission, I don't know the exact what
Two different. So there's the MACPD, which is for disability, and then ACOA is for aging.
as like city employees, are we like able, or is there a pathway for us to talk with them, like just like this community, or is it like they have their own agenda and we have to do that work,
That's a great question.
As the co-chair for MACPD, I invite any of you anytime to contact Mark. We would love to talk with you. Bring us your things. We want to review every single one of your ADA plans for full accessibility beyond physical accessibility. I'm looking at sensory accessibility, intellectual accessibility, visual accessibility. I want all the accessibility. My goal is to make sure St. Paul becomes the most accessible city in the country.
We
So
share
yeah,
that
so
goal.
call Mark. Mark will get you on our agenda, and me and Francis and
Yes,
Anna and
definitely.
Carrie over here, we'll run you through the ringer on some accessibility.
Definitely want you guys to come and talk to us, because that's what actually, as soon as the first meeting I went to last October, as soon as I heard that that's what the plan was for this MACPD, I was like, sign me up. That's what actually got me to become a member, is the fact that we're going to be talking about all these ADA accessibilities and, through all the city departments. So I'm looking forward to talking to anybody who wants to come and talk to us.
And just be prepared. You're talking with us. We're not interested in you presenting at us and us being like, oh yeah, that's so great. We're going to tell you what could be better. And we're going to do it very kindly. And Mark usually brings snacks, so it's great. But we're there to help you do better.
Yeah, and a lot of departments have come over the course of the past year. In June, we hosted the fire department, emergency services. We've talked with public works, parks, libraries, PED, water. Everyone comes through at some point. So if you do have anything specific that you'd like to bring by, I'm the liaison for the MACPD at your table right there, Stephanie Bremer for ACOA. We love having guests, so keep in touch. Any other questions? Yes, sir. For to pay for a requested accommodation for an employee? Well, technically, it's something that you would have to provide, through your department or whatnot. The price should not be something that you're considering as you're making that decision. You should just be deciding if it's a potential hire, this is the person we want, and then we'll figure it out later. So that is a good question, though. Money is limited. We have budgetary concerns and things like that. I see Beth wants to.
Well, I think the question is about LEPs and how do we get a translator, interpreter,
Oh,
something like that.
for language access.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, we do have a process for ordering an interpreter, live interpreter, video interpreter, over the phone interpreter, getting a document translated into whatever language, and also ASL if you're communicating with members of the public or within your department who are deaf or hard of hearing. Every department does have a budget for that. And like I said, it should not be something that denies access to anyone who needs to access you. A language difference is not a disability, but it is an access issue. So like I said, I say order first, ask questions later. That's one of the...
Could I speak to that?
I mean, it's better than denying access and saving a couple bucks, so.
Can I speak to that, Mark?
Yes, please,
Yeah,
Toni.
just want to clarify some of the things you said. It's on the departments in your budget to plan for that. There's no fund, no magic fund that you can tap into, at least not at this point. But it's in your department, or it should be. And if it's something that, oftentimes it's something that's new or hasn't been considered, that's usually what happens. We need to do, whatever. Or we're hiring somebody, we need to budget for that. It's something that you haven't budgeted for. That's usually what happens. So it's the department's responsibility. And as Mark said, it shouldn't be a reason why you don't hire the person. That's illegal. Illegal. Let's focus on that. It's illegal.
Because of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Illegal. And the Human Rights Act. And the State Department Human Rights Act, all of those, that's illegal. So you can't do that. And then just from a public accommodation standpoint, because this isn't a public accommodations, when you open up space to the public using any of our facilities, then you need to, if folks ask for accommodation, you need to consider that and all of those laws when it comes to language and access and whatever else. So it is up to the departments. There's no fund that you can tap into. But I would encourage you, if that comes up, to not only work with your department, but work with HREEO. Because if there is some sort of grant funding, there could be grant funding for some of this stuff. That could be a way for you to pay for it. But if there's no grants, then it's coming out of your respective departments.
Can I just say something real quick also,
Yes.
just to piggyback on everything you just said, Toni? So, I would suggest that this might be something that you could take up with the mayor and city council to create a budget because I know that when I worked for the state of Minnesota, in recent years, the legislature did appropriate a budget for state departments to be able to, give reasonable accommodations, right? Whether that was disability related or language related, and I didn't know this until right when I left the state, because I was working at Deed at the time, providing accommodations, doing Title I and Title II work. So I was really surprised, but that I don't know if that money continued to be appropriated. I don't know, Jillian, if you know about that, but I think as an employer, and especially, doing public service, I think that just makes sense, right? So maybe take that up with Mayor Carter and the City Council, but also for folks who are doing HR work, the state of Minnesota also has what's called their Connect 700 program, where people with disabilities can go through a non-competitive application and interview process and be hired if they meet minimum qualifications for any given state job. And so, I think that, and I coordinated that for Deed for a little bit when I was there, and I thought it was it wasn't without flaw, don't get me wrong, but it's a good faith effort to be able to include people with disabilities more within that HR process when hiring.
I was just going to say, while I'm sitting next to Toni, Como, I would like to formally request an accommodation that I need to snuggle with a sea lion, please. Since she says you have to grant public requested accommodations.
Reasonable accommodations.
There she is.
I'm
I
looking
see
at you
a
and the sea
question
lion.
in the back there.
Yeah,
Particularly the sea lion policy.
the sea lion policy. We're going to put the sea lion policy over there for now. But yeah, that's a great question. One, we have a disability employee resource network. Is it Disability Pride? Am I getting the name of the? It's
Accessibility.
accessibility. Maybe I was getting Disability Pride Month confused. We have an employee resource network that was formed about 2 years ago. COVID's messing me up, so if it's longer than that, I'm sorry. But we have that group, bring the issue to the group, and then they will bring the issue to Talent and Equity Resources, and we put together a process for creating a new policy. Or you can just send me an email. Send me an email saying, Toni, here is a policy idea or policy request or whatever else. And I will still bring it to the group saying, hey, I received this. Let's talk about it. Let's bring this person as a part of the group. And then we create a work group to change the policy. It is that. Now, y'all know stuff happens. It takes a long time to happen in the city, some things. But other things, it could be just as easy if okay, we're going to draft the policy, we're going to put it on the site. The work group would consist of someone from my team, maybe even myself. We probably include someone from the equity team division in Talent and Equity Resources, and then we would have to include the attorneys. And that's our process for any policy change, right? To make sure we're in alignment with the ADA. Maybe we're not, we're on the line, are we gonna get sued, all of that. And that's not a reason to not move forward with a policy. We just gotta make sure that we are in alignment with all of the things. And so that would be our process. And then once it's finalized, there's no it doesn't need to go before city council or anything like that, usually. And it's simply a change in our policy that we would do some form of communication about so that people across the city would know.
Thanks. One more question, then I'll let us out of here. Go ahead.
Hello. Do you have
My first piece of advice is follow disabled people on social media. There's a ton of fantastic bloggers I can recommend. I'm Autism on the Go, and I'm also really bad at keeping up my blog. We also have some great people like NeuroMess and Neuro something Rebel. Fidgets and Fries is a favorite of mine. Diary of a Mom is a parent who really talks a lot about things. One book I'm reading right now that's just absolutely blowing my mind is Care Work. Is that the name of the book, Mai? Care Work? I've been listening to it on Audible, and I have so many regrets that I didn't read it sooner. It's just about how do we form a world that isn't so dependent on services and embrace disability culture. Just reading anything that's written by disabled people, because the more you hear our voices, the more real we become. For as far as autism goes, I really recommend anything by Devin Price. I really don't recommend anything by Temple Grandin. She had her time. She was great at opening the doors, but there's a lot of newer voices out there. And there's a lot of great stuff out there by a lot of disabled people. I could probably list like 3,000 more books, but those are my starting points. What's the disability justice book that Sin's Invalid puts out?
Oh, it's something like Skin, Bone.
I recommend visiting the Sin's Invalid website and just
Yeah.
buying all their books.
I have copies at home that I can give out. I don't read, though.
And like Toni said, just hang out with disabled people. Any of you are more than welcome to take me to lunch or to hang out with a sea lion.
I love that. Take out to lunch. The thing, I have a 10-month-old and a toddler, so my reading is limited to maybe some Elmo stuff and some kids' books. But what we're intentional around is the books that we do read to them, and ensuring that there's an episode on Sesame Street. There's a book on Sesame Street about, I forget the name of the character, who's a disabled person. One, I think it's Julia that has autism, and then there was one on someone in a wheelchair, right? And if you read, I know this is a little elementary, but if you actually read the kids' books, it's like, we should be doing this, right? And we've lost that. Donate to NPR and NPR too, given the situations that's going on in PBS. But we should be doing that, right? Because they're talking about that for kids. We teach our kids stuff, but then we don't do it. So that's what I'm reading right now, is like a lot of kids' books. And when I read them, I'm like, oh, I need to bring this to my all-staff meeting. Like, here's the Elmo book that we're talking about, or a Sesame Street book where we're talking about creating an inclusive work environment. I don't follow folks on social media, but I need to. I think that's a good idea. For me, it's more so like articles. I'm more of a experiential person. That's why I keep focusing on like, go out and do it. Like, read about it, but go out and do it, because you're gonna have that human interaction is important. So I think it's a mixture of both. Grab you some Sesame Street books and some other authors that kids authors that you appreciate. And I think you'll really learn that what they're talking about and how to create an environment is with kids is what we should be doing as adults. And that would be my advice. For me, it's just something that we talked about lived experiences. It's just what I'm doing and being intentional around it. For those who need to read, there's tons of things and you got to be intentional around there, but I'm an experiential person. I need to have the experience, but there's an intention behind that that's my own. That's a decision that I've made to learn from other people so that I can bring it back to my environments.
Francis, did you have any book or entertainment or podcast recs?
No books. I mean, I guess I'm so much into just trying to read some of the commission stuff, like on the chart, stuff like that. I'm kind of focused in on that. I don't know any other disabled people except for on the councils I serve on. So I guess I'm just going to learn, and as I go out and do other things, that's when I interact with other people, and if they ask me about my blindness and so on, that's when I start sharing and hoping that I can get them to understand, where I'm coming from.
Mai?
Yeah, so I don't really read unless it's like, a funny meme online or something. But I mean, I do think that there are lots of really good books out there about disability and disability justice. I wouldn't, I agree with all the suggestions Jillian made. They're all great books. You can find a lot of stuff on Amazon. But I do want to say that, and I think this has already been brought up, disabled folks are some of the most innovative and creative and artistic people that I know. And so, buy the books that are written by disabled writers, go see art exhibits by disabled artists, go catch a show with disabled performers. We love to be able to show off our talent and our work and invite anybody to come to see what we do. And I guess I'll also just add that I really like whatever sends a positive message about disability, whether it's online or print or on TV or whatever. But just be mindful that, ableism manifests itself in so many ways in our lives, right? And it's hard to catch sometimes. And intent versus impact is such a huge thing when it comes to ableism, but it's also a very fine line, right? And so just be careful that you're not sort of like falling into that inspiration porn mindset where you think that it's the intentions are really good and that maybe it's, helping people with disabilities as far as what you're seeing on social media or even out in life, right, in our communities. But in fact, it probably is harming people with disabilities in the way that we're depicted, in the way that we're being, exploited for monetary gain or whatever it might be. I just want to caution all of us on keep being mindful of that as well.
I got told the other day it was so inspirational because I was driving my car. I'm like, cool.
You are an
I'm
inspirational
glad you're
driver.
inspired by that, not about the fact that I've passed dozens of laws and I'm a national speaker, but yeah, I can drive my car. Like, so yeah, like don't
Hey.
look at us as inspiring just for living. Like,
Don't
look
sell
at us
yourself
as
short,
inspiring for
Jillian.
the really cool things we do. And also, I mean, me driving my car isn't that inspiring. I'll be honest, I'm a horrible driver.
All right, we're coming up on the noon hour here, or like right about there. So I'm going to ask one last question. Everyone give me just a one-sentence answer. What is one immediate change that all of us city employees could make today that would meaningfully reduce ableist barriers in public life?
I'll let Mai start on that end.
Oh, geez. Can you repeat the question?
What is one immediate change that every city employee could make today that would meaningfully reduce ableist barriers in public life? This might be too deep a question.
Well, I've had the state fair on my mind a lot because we're trying to recruit people to volunteer. And the state fair poses so many problems, as far as access. So I guess my one sentence is, if St. Paul has any pull, help make the state fair more accessible because it's the Great Minnesota Get Together, but sometimes I can't see above the counters at some of those vendors. So, but yeah, state fair comes to mind, but it applies to anything, right? If you're out and about, just look around you, see where the access issues are, and take note of that.
Francis?
Oh, I don't know. I would just say, think of those words, universal accessibility, when you're doing any kind of policy, you're in a meeting, just continue to think about that and just have that as part of your everyday thinking and policies instead of just something that's sometimes.
I would say attend one of our board or commission meetings. I always forget the name of it.
MACPD,
Okay.
the Mayor's Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities.
Yes, attend one of those. Also attend the Employee Resource Network. Engage. You know, my whole thing is about experience, your experience, and that leading to change.
Mine is be curious. Instead of, a lot of times our first instinct to change is, no, we can't change that. But just start asking, well, why can't we change that? Why not? How would we do that? Curiosity is the best way to create a more equitable society across the board for everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm giving him my mic.
All right. I'd like to thank all 4 of our panelists and speakers here. Appreciate you all coming out today. Enjoy the rest of your day. And just keep accessibility and equitability on the forefronts of your mind, no matter what you're doing in your jobs or in your life. Appreciate y'all.